First off, there's two different things here, a purpose statement and a thesis statement. A purpose statement does not appear in your research paper, although you might put it in your abstract. I see a lot of people use their purpose statement in their abstract because it's more of a general overview kind of a sentence that gives you the gist of your paper. The reason I want you to write a purpose statement is because that gives me a sense of where you're at right now in thinking about your big topic. It does help you focus on the specific purpose of your paper, of course. That's why it's called a purpose statement. And if you know what your purpose is and what you want to focus on, then you can actually move on to writing the thesis statement, which does appear in your paper and is a lot more specific about exactly what you're going to put in your research paper. So purpose statement is still more general. Thesis statement is a lot more specific. I'm going to switch to the next slide and make sure we sync the display so you all see the same thing. When you write a purpose statement, it's still clear and concise. Lots of times it has words like determine, investigate, examine, learn, consider. Avoid really, really general statements so that we don't end up still not having any idea what you're talking about. Some examples here. Animations are great fun. The effective purpose statement you see here at the top, the purpose of this research paper is to investigate the topic of inclusion to determine if full inclusion benefits learning disabled students' academic achievement. See some of the key words are highlighted in blue. Gives you little signal words that make purpose statements really good. Or perhaps the purpose of my paper is to examine the topic of homeschooling and to determine if homeschooled students are well adjusted socially in comparison to students who attend formal schools. So you may notice as you look at these that the beginning of them pretty much is like the broad topic, which you've all identified at this point, and then the second half of it is a little bit more specific about what part of that broad topic you're going to focus on. But it's still not to the point of a thesis statement yet. It's still pretty general. Here's a couple others in case you want to look at some more examples of purpose statements that work. I'll let you read those on your own. And as a side note, you all can be advancing these slides yourself too. Up near the top of the screen you will see a bunch of buttons like an arrow, a T, a pencil, and that kind of stuff. Next to that there is an arrow and then the number 4 and then another arrow. The 4 identifies that we're on slide 4 of this presentation, but then you can use the back and forward arrow to move yourself. I keep doing that. When I advance it like now, then I'm hitting a button on my end that you can't see that says sync the display for everybody so that no matter what, you're where I am, so that we're all looking at the same thing at the same time. But you have the freedom to go back and forth as needed. You want to avoid some general statements that are way too general for your purpose statement like these. The first one is very non-specific. The purpose of this research paper is to examine the phonics and whole language strategies in reading acquisition. At this point, if you wrote something like that for a purpose statement, I still don't know exactly what you're doing for this 5 to 8 page paper because it's way too broad and not very specific for a 5 to 8 page paper. The second one is not really investigating a problem. And the purpose of this paper is to investigate the issue of ADHD in the classroom. And I would say to that, what's the so what? Who cares? Why? So make sure that your purpose of your paper really is an argumentative research paper, so you have to have a point. You have to have a controversial issue or reason to be researching this, and make sure that's conveyed in your purpose and thesis statement, for that matter. Couple unacceptable statements, because I think sometimes it's good to show you what things are not that great. The purpose of the paper is to discuss the issue of violence in American schools. Okay, that's fine, but, you know, wow. We're writing a 5 to 8 page paper, not a book. So that's kind of like book level, and we need to be a lot more specific. The second one, the focus of this paper is to examine the effects of drug and alcohol awareness programs on high school students. And in this case, at first you might think it's pretty good because we got, a certain thing, drug and alcohol awareness programs, and just on a certain population, high school students. But it's pretty broad in the fact that what kind of effects, like the psychological effects, the social effects, the academic effects, the, what effects? You got to be more specific. And then the last one is, this paper will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of school uniform policies in public schools. And in this case, it's kind of mundane, and who really cares? But more so, maybe, is that it's going on both sides of the fence, the advantages and the disadvantages. You have 5 to 8 pages to write this paper. You have got to pick a side. You cannot possibly give a balanced argument for pro and con for the paper that you've chosen, the topic that you've chosen. So pick a side. Does that mean you're not going to acknowledge the other side? Of course not. If you're pro-inclusion, for example, you're going to acknowledge that there are experts out there that have problems with the idea of inclusion, but you're going to do it in a sentence or two, not pages worth. So you need to pick a side when you write up your purpose and your thesis statement for this paper. Questions so far? Okay, then we need to move into what's the difference between a purpose statement and a thesis statement. First off is that the purpose statement does not go in the paper, the thesis statement does. Another way to think about the difference is that the purpose statement is the overall summary overview statement. The thesis statement is the exact, specific, main idea of your paper and clearly describes all the parts that are going to be in your paper specifically. So that's, the biggest honing in, kind of difference between the two. Here's some examples of purpose and thesis statements that have been written by students. Somebody wrote, the purpose of their research paper is to examine the topic of looping in elementary schools to determine if the practice benefits the achievement of skills for slower learners. And then that idea was transformed into this thesis statement. Looping, the practice of keeping students with the same teacher for 2 years or more, has become a popular policy in public elementary schools across the country, mainly because research studies have indicated that children who attend looped classes have higher levels of academic achievement in comparison to students who are not in looped classes. So you have a very clear picture of what they're studying, looping, in elementary schools, public elementary schools, and specifically looking at academic achievement. So you've put the blinders on, you've narrowed it down to something very specific that you can do in 5 to 8 pages. Here's another one. Purpose of this research paper is to investigate the topic of block scheduling in high schools to determine teachers' attitudes toward the practice. And then the thesis statement is, block scheduling, the practice of scheduling high school classes in 4 period days instead of 7 period days, has been adopted by high schools in an attempt to provide students with a more intensive learning experience. However, research indicates that teachers have reservations about the effectiveness of block scheduling for student achievement. Notice this thesis statement is 2 sentences. That's okay. So it was easily split up and then reads a little nicer. You know specifically they're looking at block scheduling. They've defined what that means. And they're saying their side on the issue, that they're maybe not so positive about the whole idea. And then they're going to present those research studies as it relates to its effectiveness for student achievement. So they're not talking about the social aspect. They're not talking about the teacher workload aspect. They're specifically looking at student achievement. So they've put the blinders on for that research paper to be done in 5 to 8 pages. As you look at some of these examples, hopefully it's getting your mind flowing, the juices flowing about how you might write your thesis statement and your purpose statement for your paper. Alrighty, I'm going to bring everybody back together here as you're feverishly writing and thinking about this. I've posted in WebEx here a list of 5 questions that, as you're getting into these small groups in just a moment with your learning team, these are the criteria that you're going to be using to rate everybody's thesis statement. You might notice that I'm not asking you to rate the purpose statement. I just really am mostly concerned about the thesis statement, but the purpose statement kind of comes along for the ride because it might be useful in your abstract. But these are some things to consider, and as you just self-evaluate your own thesis right now, before we get into groups, look at it. Is it a complete sentence? Is it grammatically correct? Is every word clear and unambiguous in meaning? So in other words, have you defined all that educational jargon that we educators love to use, but are you defining what it means? You probably noticed that in those examples that I shared, that they defined what block scheduling was or looping and that kind of thing. For the third one, does it call for additional information and explanation? In other words, does it explain a so what? So after you read your thesis statement, did you kind of answer the so what? Did it give a so what? Because if you're just making a statement, my response to that's kind of like, oh, that's nice. Who cares? Why should we care? So in your thesis statement, make sure you get that, why we should care about this in there. And then the biggest thing is probably number 4, can you prove it to be true in a space of 5 to 8 pages? So have you gotten specific enough? And at this stage of the game, I realize it's tentative. You haven't read a lot of research at this point, perhaps. So it's going to change over time, perhaps, as you keep reading. But let's try to get the blinders on so that it's reasonable. A lot of times I suggest to students to pick like 3 aspects of the issue and stick them in your thesis statement. Like, I believe this because ABC. And pick 3 of the reasons why that you're reading in the research that are coming up as reasons something is good or bad or whatever side you're picking. And that's all you focus on. Not to say that there isn't other things to talk about with the issue, but that's just not your goal that day. You're only looking at those couple things, not every last little thing. Because you're not writing a book, you're writing a 5 to 8 page paper. And then the last one, will the thesis statement go beyond a term paper and explore controversy? Sometimes when I teach this to mostly freshmen, this becomes a problem because they're more used to the high school writing as opposed to college writing. Most of you in this room hypothetically said, since we're all over the place, have done this before. So this isn't something new to you. You understand how to write college-level papers, but are you picking a side? Is it exploring some kind of controversial educational issue so that we can actually dig a little bit and see what we think and believe and feel about these issues. So those are the big parameters to think about the quality of a thesis statement and to kind of decide how your partner's thesis statements are sounding at this point. So when you go into this purpose and thesis statement discussion board, to start a thread, use the green Create Thread button. And just to make sure everyone's seeing that, it's right here. So you click that green button, and then it will start a new thread for you. And you can type like an email message almost, copy, paste, or type in your purpose and your thesis statement for your paper. Your name will be already attached to the post, so you don't have to worry about signing it if you don't want to, because you can see with the one I posted here, you can see my name is listed. And then basically, I want you to read everybody's purpose and thesis statements and respond to other people so that you can give them some feedback about how well they did and maybe ideas you have to make it better. And I'm suggesting that you comment or suggest revisions to 3 different people. So, we have, 16 people in our class. So you don't have to, respond to everybody, but certainly respond to at least 3 people. And then I'm going to ask you to rate the posts.